Now, 7 years after it was launched, Sir John Chilcot released all 2.6 million words and 6,000 pages of his report on the Iraq War and occupation on Wednesday. It was a damning verdict on Tony Blair's decision to join the US invasion and the lack of planning for what was to follow. Mr. Blair apologised for any mistakes made, but said, "I believe we made the right decision and the world is better and safer." Well, some commentators have slammed that claim and say the invasion of Iraq helped lead to the rise of so-called Islamic State. Others, that religious factionalism in the area was a breeding ground for terrorism already. So is Islamic extremism caused by religion or politics? Well, joining our panel now is Ramona Ali, a journalist with a particular interest in faith and identity. Welcome, Ramona. Charlie, I'm going to begin with you. So Tony Blair said the invasion of Iraq has made the world a better and safer place. Can he justify that claim?
Yes, very much so. First off, people make the mistake of judging now versus then. It should be now versus how it would have been now had Saddam Hussein still been in power. But you can look at specifically the fact of if he did not have actual stocks of WMD, he would have reconstituted his program. Because of the Iraq invasion, Gaddafi gave up his program. It also led to the AQ Khan network. So there's at least three things that made it a better place than what it was. We were right, and it was the right decision to do it.
Many people saying, Ramona, that the religious tension that we've seen and the escalation and the emergence of so-called Islamic State, that would have happened anyway. There was religious tension in the Middle East. It would have bubbled away without political intervention.
I think that extremism and radicalisation is a complicated process, so I don't think there's any one factor of causality. But for me, what really hurts me and what sickens me the most is that religion and the abuse, the sickening abuse of religion is being used to promote a very frightening agenda where nobody is safe. So the Daesh extremists don't even stop at attacking the second most holiest shrine site for Muslims, and that's the Prophet's Mosque in Saudi Arabia. So they won't stop at anything, and that for me is such a huge threat for all of us. And
Douglas, how much of that creation or the uprising of Daesh or so-called Islamic State, how much is that to blame for the invasion of Iraq?
Well, first of all, I mean, Islamic extremism has existed since the beginning of Islam in some form, and it certainly doesn't start in 2003. And I mean, just take 1 year, 1979, the overthrow of the Shah in Iran, the overtaking of Iran by a highly fundamentalist Ayatollah Khomeini and his followers. That same year, the Grand Mosque in Mecca was taken over by a group of Islamic extremists of a very ISIS-like kind, and they were battling inside the mosque in Mecca with the with Saudi forces. That's just 1 year, 1979. So it's very important, I think, in this country not to pretend that history started in the region in 2003. However, as we know from the Chilcot report, that, you know, there are very serious things that went wrong. Even if you agreed with the toppling of Saddam Hussein, obviously the planning post-operations was atrocious, if not non-existent. There was some, but it was atrocious. That has given rise to an opportunity of effectively stateless actors being able to move in. So, you know, it's never an either-or with these things, but particularly in this situation, I think people have to bear in mind, as I say, Islamic extremism predated this by a very long way.
Yeah,
but there are things you can do that can make it a lot worse.
Let's make clear, picking up on Ramona's point, that Muslims are being attacked here. This is not just a Muslim problem. This is not just Muslims attacking. Muslims are being attacked as well in the region.
Everybody knows that.
More Muslims are being killed by these groups than I think actually Westerners.
Yeah, but it's all unacceptable. There is no justification for violence.
Lola, how much do you think Iraq now has been taken advantage of as a recruitment tool since the invasion?
Yeah, most certainly, I'm sure, because I've seen things online, especially with Western-born people, basically saying, well, look at what happened with Iraq. You know, Tony Blair went in, they invaded Iraq, they created instability, so why should I care for the West? Why should I subscribe to Western ideologies of democracy and freedom when people are going in to kill my people without a basis? And that was before the Chilcot report came out. You know, that sense has been growing, I think, for quite some time.
Douglas, there's been a very strong anger, hasn't there, about the way the UK has acted in the Middle East. Has that been justified?
I think there are times when it is justified, but but the flip side of that is also important to bear in mind. Take one example, 1998, when the Blair government intervened in Kosovo to save thousands and thousands of Muslim lives from the Serb aggression there. It would do a great deal of good, I think, in this country and elsewhere if people acknowledged from all communities there are times when a government can get something wrong, but there are times also when a government can get something right, and that should itself also be remembered and also celebrated.
Has, Ramona, though, that been the focus on the negative, or when the government, as Douglas says, has got things wrong, is that part of the reason why so many people, or that we're recognising that more people are being attracted to extremism from the West?
I think, again, it's very complicated. We can't just point to one thing, that it's politics or religion. It's a multifaceted problem and issue that we need to address. And as Douglas says, we should be celebrating the fact that Britain intervened in the genocide in Bosnia. And that was something that we should be proud of as British people. And another thing that I think about the Chilcot inquiry report is, I personally feel that that shows the strength of our democracy, that there was an independent inquiry into a former Prime Minister on his actions on the Iraq War. So that's is something that should be celebrated.
Can I make one other point as well, which is that in all of this, it's very important not to cover over, as it were, which I think some commentators have in recent years, the absolute barbarism of the Saddam Hussein regime. I mean, Saddam Hussein killed more Muslims than anybody else in the late 20th century. I mean, if you've been to the prisons, as I have, in Iraq, that he was holding people in, the people who pretend that the barbarism in Iraq only started in 2003 really should do the victims of Saddam Hussein the decency of remembering what he did as well. He didn't just keep a lid on things, as people said. He was the most appalling butcher of modern times. And I think that context is not nothing.
One of the problems we also have is, when you get these sort of controversial issues, is there's a conflation of different things. I mean, I was in favor of the war. I'm still in favor of the war. But I think afterwards there were major mistakes made. But part of this is you've got to sort of, and this kind of goes back to the last discussion we had about Dallas, these sort of discussions where it goes onto Twitter, and you've got Tony Blair, as I believe it was one of the sister of one of the soldiers, said the biggest terrorist in the world. Now, I can understand from the point she's coming from. I can make some allowances, but this is the level of discussion, and that doesn't help. You know, you have to look at the context of how that decision was made.
Lola?
Yes, I think the problem is that if Tony Blair and George Bush had said, we're going in to depose Saddam Hussein because he's a butcher and he's massacring people, that's one thing. But they basically made up a false argument, and I think that is unethical for heads of state to do. And I think when it comes to extremism, I see where people are attracted to extremism is if they believe in authority figures. And when they feel let down by authority figures, they'll look for other authority figures to step in to show them the way. So if they're let down by a prime minister or by a country, and then someone else comes in and says, well, I can show you the way, these people have let you down, then they're likely to go down that path.
Because we're looking at the reasons,
Douglas,
for extremism.
Yes, and I mean, one other thing, if I may, just on this thing about the causes. I mean, I think that the evidence from Chilcot on the way in which intelligence was used is damning. It's really, really damning. But I do think, again, as a society, we should reflect on something as follows. Anne Clwyd, a Labour MP, a very distinguished Labour MP, campaigned for years throughout the 80s and 90s to indict Saddam Hussein for war crimes and to get Saddam Hussein held to account for his butchery of the Kurds, for his butchery of the Shias in the 90s, and there was no public desire for that. And I think when we reflect on what happened in 2003, we should remember the silence, with, as I say, some exceptions like Anne Clwyd, of people who campaigned throughout to hold him to account.
I
Remember,
want to move away from the reasons for going into war, because this discussion has been done many, many a time. This is about extremism and whether it's down to religion and politics, and just reflecting on Lola's point, I think, when you said that the disappointment people can have and how that's being reflected in figures of authority.
Well, there's a difference between extremism and terrorism. Terrorism is political. They're trying to use terror to change a political end. Extremism is someone who hates something, and he's not doing it for political means. He thinks abortion is evil. He's going to take out abortion providers or abortion clinics. There's nothing political. He just wants to eradicate them. And I think in this you have a mixture of both. You have politics, because politics is power, but it's backed up with extremism, because and this is why it's important, again, that we need to call it, without being offensive to Muslims, call it extremist jihad terror, because these are people that would do an act. I can't see any other way they would do it, you know, to blow themselves up.
And,
Ramona,
you have said that, of course, these acts are abhorrent and not reflective of the whole Muslim community, a tiny, tiny part who have been affected. But how responsible are our politicians here in the UK for firing that up?
I think we all have a responsibility with extremism and violent extremism. You know, it's a threat to everybody, and we've seen that in America. We've seen violence in America. We've seen it in Brussels, in Syria, in Iraq, and also here in the UK, with our MP Jo Cox, who was so tragically killed. So it's a threat to all of us. It's a threat on stability. It's a threat on our freedoms. And I think that religion, for me personally, is about placing humanity above all else. A religion is about ethics, and that is about placing humanity above all else. And I think us as liberal-minded people, we place humanity above everything.
I think this is a timely point to go to Tommy. You've been sending us your texts and tweets on this. Tommy, lots of reaction, I imagine.
Yeah, lots of people, I think similar to something that Ramona said, they're saying it's a complex mixture of religion and politics that is causing the state that we're in. Let's have a look at the first one from Mark. It says, extremism is caused by deluded idiots. They use politics and religion as an excuse. John says, extremism is caused by religion, but politics does nothing about it. Emma saying religion and politics are just an excuse for violent nihilism. And Grace is saying we absolutely must learn from this and do all that can be done to minimise future war. I think we can all agree on that.
Indeed. Tommy, thanks very much. Douglas, politics there. Should politicians take responsibility or be more mindful about the impact of these decisions, you know, not just tackling a country or a despotic leader, but what it leads to further on?
Yes, I think so. I mean, terrorism can come from pretty much any ideological source. I mean, there are people who commit acts of violence in the name of, you know, anti-globalization, in the name of environmentalism, all sorts of things. And the moment that they become violent is the moment that they step outside the normal bounds of political discourse. I think one thing that it really does have to be said, most of the time when there is a form of extremism and it is traceable to a particular ideology, whether that's a religious ideology or a political ideology, others who follow that ideology they don't take responsibility for the actions, but try to work as hard as possible to make sure that anybody who does that in the name of their faith or belief is effectively pushed out. And I think for very many non-Muslims, there has been a great concern in recent years. Not that Muslims as a whole should be held responsible, far from it, but that there has been a certain denial from elements of the Muslim community of saying this has nothing to do with our religion, when in fact everyone knows it does have something to do with it, and that's what's so important to tackle.
What I think we keep falling into a trap where we are letting these murderous criminals speak for us and define us. And I think that, you know, if they say, oh, we're doing this in the name of religion, why on earth are we taking their word for it? You know, the people who should be listened to are the ones who are opposing that. The vast majority of us who are against violence, who hold to the sanctity of life, you know, these are the ones that I want to define religion, to define us as a society
but
as
the
well.
problem is, and I remember with was it the one-armed sheikh outside the mosque? I remember Melanie Phillips wrote about this. She said, MI5, MI6, watch this and see these guys out in the street, and they thought, this guy's a bit of a clown. What they didn't realize is, to the people sitting around the mosque watching him, they took him very seriously. So I agree with you.
Definitely
you know,
problems.
obviously, these people don't represent Islam, but at the same time, in their mind, they do, and that's what's important.
It's a very, very warped,
but it's reality.
View of it. Yeah, so they're taking it.
So the extremist thing with the, you know, politics and religion, I think we also underestimate how resourceful and how resourced so-called Islamic State is. And actually, I do think they have political ambition. So by leaving, you know, Iraq and other places open, what you've done is now created a vacuum for them to come in as political leaders, not just religious leaders. And I've read a lot about how well organised they are in terms of their movement of weapons and money
their trade.
And their trade. So I do think we have to be aware of that.
I'm so sorry. Do you know, I say this every week. This is all we have time for in this discussion. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for your comments. Do keep them coming in.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.